Welcome to the Sales for Nerds podcast. I'm Chief Nerd Ruben Swartz. If you feel more comfortable with SQL and sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, and if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you. Hello, folks. Ruben Swartz from Sales for Nerds here. Today, I'm excited to have Bryan Payne, founder and CEO of Scout Deals and a serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Embassy Graphics, launched a lawn care business when he was in high school. He's a 12-time Ironman finisher, and perhaps most bravely of all, coming on the podcast, he's a beer drinker, but he's being a good sport today. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you.
And today we are actually sitting down together and we are sharing some St. Vincent Pinot Noir from Sonoma County. I feel like this is the world's least significant gesture of support in the aftermath of a natural disaster, to drink some Sonoma County wine after all the fires there. But what I've heard from people out there is that they would like everyone to keep drinking their wine and keep visiting and try to keep things going. So anyway, Bryan, cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Ruben.
So as a beer drinker, what do you think?
Very good.
Very good?
Yeah,
okay.
Very good. Yep. I forgot what I've been missing all these years.
This is my kind of wine drinker. So yeah, we've got kind of a fruity California Pinot that I think is going to open up nicely as we get on towards the middle of the interview.
It's really nice.
So Bryan, tell me, how did you get into business and entrepreneurialism and working for yourself and so on?
Right. You know, I think it's just part of the DNA is probably the best way that I could put it. Ever since I was a young person, funny story is my brother and I, you know, you've heard of world famous chocolates, and schools would sell chocolate almonds and things like that as fundraisers. And we went to a poor Catholic school, and to get dodge balls and soccer balls and all that, we had to sell these chocolate almonds. And anyway, my brother and I were so good at it. He was a year younger than me, that by the second, we won the contest first year when we were in, I think I was in the fourth grade, he was in the third grade. By the following year, the world famous chocolate truck, and this is no joke, pulled up to our house with a pallet. We sold in our best year, I think 3,600 packages of chocolate almonds, my brother and I.
So we have to rewind all the way back to elementary school.
Yeah.
So what made you so good?
Well, now I'm going to give away the secrets. But first of all, we grew up in the north in the winters, so it was really cold. So we decided, let's not sell house to house. Let's go into these big apartment complexes, number one. And then we also came up with a song, because my brother and I were the only two kids at that time in the 70s that had bean shaves. All of our friends had long hair. So the older ladies and stuff really thought we were cute. So we came up with a song. We're from St. Alphonsus School. We think you're cool. I know you think we're cool, so buy our almonds. And they'd open the door and we'd do that. And it was like, almost 100% close rate.
Very nice. So the other kids were like shaggy long hair, and everyone was telling them to get off their lawn.
Yeah, exactly. And my brother and I were, we were just cute little kids that had a song. And now, in terms of getting into business, what we also did, there was a method to our madness. Is at that time there was wrappers on them that would have the school name and the price. So what we did was we learned that if we could take the wrapper off, we could sell the chocolates for more than what the school. So the school would get $1, and then we would take the wrapper off. We'd sell it for $1.25. And then it actually progressed from there to a point where it was almost what you see now with Uber, where they'll have fluctuating rates of prices.
Right.
Well, when we would actually get to a point that if the door opened and we could just tell by the expression of our song and stuff, the price would fluctuate. How much is it? Oh, you guys are that's $2.
Right. So you had variable surge pricing.
We had surge pricing, variable surge pricing, and so that was in probably the 4th to the 6th grade. So that's where my entrepreneurial career started, so to speak. And then getting, as I went through school, high school, I ended up meeting my wife in high school, and we started a lawn care business at 16 years old. And by the time I was a senior in high school, we had 13 staff, and we had gotten into, at that time, liquid lawn fertilizer. So it wasn't just cutting grass, although it started that way. We took a lawnmower, my dad's lawnmower, put it in the back of my wife's dad's car. We didn't even have a car, and that's how we started.
And so how did you go from there to, I'm going to expand and have this sort of quote unquote real business? I mean, I remember in high school doing lawn care or you know, cutting brush and all that menial stuff that you do in high school, but it never even occurred to me that I should expand and outsource and hire people and so on.
Yeah. Well, there's just something, I've always been intrigued, read, you know, books, whether it was on, you know, the founding of Walmart and Sam Walton, or, you know, you name it. I think I've read most all the books, and just always been intrigued with growth and growing businesses and organizations. And it's something that, you know, maybe I get myself in trouble doing it. Sometimes you go, geez, it'd be good just to keep it small. But yeah, that's a great question. It just felt natural, like that we should do it, keep expanding, keep growing. You know, we ended up, I sold the business when I was 19 to one of our foremen, which was really cool. So here's a guy who came, started working. I was 16, 17. He was mid-30s. Yeah.
So you had your first exit in high school.
Yeah. Right after. Last month of high school, I didn't show up very often. I was working, and actually, I had a contract with the school to do the yard.
So you wouldn't be in class; you'd be out of the.
Yeah, and I was making more money than the teachers, and that was just like the greatest, because, you know, I'd be out of class and I wasn't there, and they would say, you know, where's Bryan? The teacher would ask, and the rest of the class would, you know, he's out there making more money than all you guys.
How did that make the teachers feel?
Oh, I don't know. They were all good sports. But out of my high school that I went to, so I met my wife the year before I went to a public school. I got kicked out of my Jesuit boys' school, and then they let me back in for the 12th grade. So out of my Jesuit boys' school, which was, you know, suit and tie and all that sort of stuff, 3 exams a year per subject, really hard school, but really well regarded. There was 3 classes, there was 90 students. I was the only student out of all 90 that did not go on to post-secondary. So I had some of them going to Harvard, Yale, and it was like, even in my yearbook picture, it says, you know, future, at that time it was called Cut Right Lawns, Empire, Fate, you know, working, cutting grass for the city.
So how did you get kicked out? Can we talk about that on the show?
Yeah. Okay, so I was always one of the things for me is I was always one of these students that got in trouble, and detention was a big thing. I actually hold the record in this Jesuit boys' school. It was called St. Paul's, and instead of a detention, they called it jugs, justice under God. And you get 1 hour. It's not sitting there. It's like 1 hour, and they give you work. And if it's in the middle of winter, it could be shoveling the front sidewalk of the school. And in fact, so I got expelled, and the reason I got expelled was I did 2 things. I threw firecrackers into the competing dressing room at the basketball game of the team. And then on the way home, because I had to take 3 public transit buses, it was like 30 miles from home, a friend of mine, Steve Redmond, and I lit a firecracker, and it rolled when the buses stop and you get that forward motion, well, it rolled down. And to this day, I don't know how they knew it was us. Somebody turned us in because it was about 8:00 at night. It was after the basketball game. So anyway, that's what happened. And the funny story on that is, not only did I get expelled, but I was supposed to get the strap. And I didn't show up to school the next day, and Steve did. Steve got the strap. So now I get a phone call at home, and they say, oh, guess what? You're getting the strap tomorrow. So that's even worse than getting the strap, because all night you can't sleep. And the vice principal was this ex-big professional football player, Mr. Dawson. And so sure enough, and I come into school the next day, people I don't know are going, so, and second period is when we had the announcements. And sure enough, I get called in, and Mr. Dawson says, oh, I'm sure you've been thinking about this the whole time. I go, yeah. He goes, well, I'm not going to give you the strap. And now I'm like, I'm totally ready. I had, guys were saying after the first hit, your hand will be numb. Don't worry. And so anyway, they gave me two months of jugs. And I had to come in on Saturdays. I had to paint the football lines. The greatest one I ever learned was that the first one he threw me. It was winter and it had just snowed. So Mr. Dawson, I didn't have boots. I didn't have gloves. I was too cool for that. He says, get the shovel. And it was cold. It was like 20 below. So anyway, I quickly shoveled, figured it all out in half an hour. And then I went back for okay, I'm going to be done. So he comes, you didn't finish. Yeah, see? So he goes, okay. He kind of literally picks me up, throws me in the middle of the pile, and then says, start shoveling it back on.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a tough Jesuit boys' school.
So you decide after this that maybe you don't want to keep going to school, or what goes?
I knew school was not for me. And I think school's great. There's a lot of, it just wasn't for me. Like I said, I could be a perfect person right up till 5 minutes before the bell rang. And I would literally didn't know if I was getting a detention. With 5 minutes left, I didn't know if I would get a detention or not. So I just knew it wasn't for me. There were certain teachers that really impacted me. One, Mr. Bugera, was just an amazing teacher. And so there's certain ones, but for me, I was one of these students that was all about credibility, right? And I wasn't one into theory. I wanted to see someone who had been there, who had done something, right? And so I didn't want to just memorize stuff, and it just wasn't for me. I'm a born sort of, I guess in today's world, schooling's turning into what they call the 4 C's, like critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. And the way that they're teaching this now in schools is they're saying, look, in the jobs today, if you're in the second grade, 60% of the jobs aren't around. You don't even know what they're going to be, right? And you're looking at it that what do you need out of school? And really what you need is to be able to adapt to this crazy world we're in, right? Things that didn't exist yesterday are existing today. So it's that, how do you collaborate with someone? What's your creativity? How do you critically think? How do you communicate? So if you can teach those skills, which is what I was basically doing, I went into the real world from school. I call it the real world, to the work world right out of high school. And I had to critically think, and I had to communicate, and it's like a job. So now school is actually they call it 21st century learning. I have through my yearbook connections have learned a lot about this. And today, a lot of these schools, I probably would have stayed in school longer if that was the way they were teaching it back then.
So you were labeled a problem student, but you were really just ahead of your time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell my mom.
So you get done with high school. What happens next?
So I sold my lawn care business. It was seasonal, and I wanted to get into something, but I didn't know what I wanted to get into. And so my dad was in the printing business, and I went to him and I said, hey, is there any, companies that you know of that are in the business that you would recommend? And he gave me a company. He said, go talk to these guys at Image Color. And what they were is they were a pre-press at that time. In the printing industry, they did all the scanning, and it was the most technical part of printing, and all computers, and a scanner was $500,000, and and it was a big drum, and you really had to know what you were doing. So anyway, I went to the company, and I literally called the president, Tim Riddock, and I said, "Can I come see you?" He said, "Yes." I gave my resume. Looking back now, it's a lithography shop, and I use the word lithographer, which technically the books say lithographer, but in the real world, if you're in the industry, they don't call them lithographers. So I was a duck out of water. And long story short, he called me the next day and said, I'm sorry, we haven't got any opening. And these were just fabulous company. So I thought about it and I said, you know what? My friends are going to school. They're paying for an education. Even if I went and worked for this guy for free for a year, I could, top company, I could probably write my own ticket. So I called him back and I said, I'd like to come down and see you. And okay. And so I went down and I said, look, Tim, I'm prepared to work for free. And so he didn't jump on it right away. I said, I really want to work for you guys. So he called me back at home and he said, look, his exact words were, I like your piss and vinegar and we're going to hire you. And he ended up paying me right out of the gate. And within 2 years, I basically was production manager of one of the largest pre-press facilities of its kind. And then I got to a level where I couldn't be the general manager because my boss, Neil Mackey, who I just absolutely loved working for, he was the no way I was going to, he was only 10 years older and he was doing a great job. So then I thought, you know what, I'm going to transition. Can I go into sales? Right. And there happened to be an opening in sales. They had hired somebody. This was another funny story. So they hired a guy, they paid him great money. They gave him all the accounts and he didn't do anything. So I thought, geez, this guy's gone. So I go to Tim, the president. I say, hey, Tim, I'd like to get into sales. And he didn't make my life easy. He goes, I want you to go home and write why you think you'd be good for sales. And I'm an all or nothing type person. So I literally got home Friday at like 5, 6 o'clock at night, whatever it was, probably 7. And all weekend I worked. And it was the old typewriters. And I typed up, my mom gave it to me. I typed up this document. She gave it to me like a year ago because they were moving out of their house and they found it. And it was literally 30 pages of why I should go into sales. And so he ended up letting me go into sales. But he told me, he says, we gave all those accounts to Art, to this other, the guy's name was Art. We gave it to him and he didn't do anything with them. So I'm not giving you any accounts. If you want to go into sales, you got to get all your own business. And I'm, how old was I? Maybe 21, 22. I'm like, sure, whatever. I don't care. And so then, the city we were in was a tough market, small. And I thought, geez, I think if I went to a bigger city like Toronto or, and Toronto was the market that I wanted to go into. And so anyway, so I went to Tim and I loved his leadership style. For me, it worked well. I remember sitting in his office and I said, what market should I go after? What should we be? He goes, I don't know, figure it out. If I wanted to talk golf with him, he'd talk golf all day long. But so it was the best advice. What do you want to do? So I started thinking about it, and I decided I wanted to go after the publishing industry. And I wanted to, start in Toronto where it was major publishers. And so I bought my ticket, all that. And the day before I left, Tim called me in his office and he said, and these again, his exact words, if you think you're flying all over Hell's Half Acre on my dime, you're crazy. You better bring some work back right away.
And what happened?
I brought a $60,000 job back from Prentice Hall, which was unheard of. Like normally, and I didn't even know what I didn't know. Like in our industry, the sales cycle at that time to get a job that big could be a year because you're going in, you got Random House, HarperCollins, Scholastic, Prentice Hall. Like these are big companies that have, buyers and like to get it. First of all, a $60,000 job in the pre-press world was the equivalent of about a $600,000 print job. It was about a factor of 10.
Okay.
So could you imagine going into a business, they don't know you, and pulling out in today's dollars $600,000? So
how'd you do it?
What I did is I planned out my trip. So first of all, the short answer is just sheer volume of calls. So here I was. I didn't know a big city, Toronto, New York, whatever. I spent so much time in New York. I didn't know any of it. and back then we didn't have like MapQuest or anything, right? So what I did was I booked on the hour. So in a typical day would be 8 hours, let's say. And I think it was almost like one an hour in around there. Like I was doing at least 6 to 8 calls a day, which is even, I look at it now and I go, how did I do that? And I'd get a map board. So not only would I map them out, but I'd have to call the people to set up the time to come in at that time and all that sort of stuff, right? And some would cancel. And then of course you're driving in a big city and you've got a map in the passenger side of your car, right? And forget about texting. That's safe compared to what we were doing back then. So anyway, the way I got it was I showed up and I had such a strong technical background from being a production manager. Plus, I believe, I'm a natural type salesperson, communicator, very sincere, and the timing was right. So, the fact that I made in those 4 days, I think I had 28 calls in 4 days, and the fact that I just hit them at the right place, like luck is, I remember. This is another funny story going back to high school. So one day I decide I'm sick, right? I'm sick of school, but you go and you get a note and you're going home. So I'm waiting for a bus. And back then this was a time when you could hitchhike. So I'm standing at the bus stop in front of the school hitchhiking. All of a sudden this Mercedes-Benz pulls up, beautiful. And back then a Mercedes meant something, right? It was like a coupe, silver. And I get in and the guy's talking on a phone, like the kind that are attached in the car, right? So it's like the box, they're attached to the car. And I'm like, wow, who is this guy? So, he waves me in and then sits down. He's still yakking away on the phone. And about 10 minutes later, he hangs up and he goes, hey, I'm Gary Backman. Oh yeah, Gary Backman, where I grew up, was one of the top real estate agents. And his brother is Backman Turner Overdrive. Randy Backman from BTO, there's huge, they're like not Rolling Stones, but in that era, right? Backman Turner Overdrive.
Okay, no.
Yeah. So anyway, he's part of BTO and so everybody knows this guy and he goes, yeah, I dropped out in the 10th grade. He's telling me this. He goes, you go to that fancy school over there? Yeah. How do you like it? Oh, it's all right. He goes, I dropped out in the 10th grade. And the one thing, we ended up becoming friends years later. But one of the things he told me, and I'll never forget, was he says, hard work equals luck. You need to be lucky, but hard work equals luck. And that always sat with me. So that is how I got Prentice Hall, was I worked very, very hard and I got lucky, And I came back, it was the second biggest job in the history of the company. The biggest job was $100,000. That was by one of the owners years ago, Tim. Right. This was the second biggest job in the history.
So he thought your trip to Toronto paid off.
He never thanked me. I never got a pat on the back or nothing, but I never got told I couldn't go on any more trips.
So what happened after that? You go out and you just got a ton of piss and vinegar and you go close some deals.
No, actually, yeah. So it was a nice transition because here I brought in all this business. And so, being, a younger person, you don't necessarily nail down. I remember hearing, if you bring $1 million in, you'll make $100,000. So I go, okay, 10 points or whatever. So it got to a point where I was bringing in a lot more work than I was getting paid. And so then, of course, I went and I met with the president. And I said to him, hey, I've been 6 months, I've broken all these records, can you pay me some more money now? Like we talked about it. And he did something that really hurt me and brought tears to my eyes. He said, well, we'll start now. Let's just clean the slate and start now. So here I had busted myself for the last 6 months thinking I was going to have a lot. And I wasn't making great money back then, especially when you come in, you say you're going to work for free. They give you a pay, but and so anyway, at that moment, I just said, I'm out of here. I didn't tell him that in my head. I said, that's it. Right. I'm out of here. And I decided to go in competition with him. So I was 23, 24 at that time. And I just said, okay, I love the business I'm in. I'm doing it really well. And what happened at that time that also made it interesting was Macintosh was just coming out. So I had no money a year or two earlier, and I went and bought a Mac SE right? Because I just had this feeling that you had
This is what, early 80s?
Yeah, this would have been 84-ish, 85. Yeah, 85, 86, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it was probably 86. And so we're living, my wife and I, who I've been with since high school, we're living in a one bedroom house in an old part of area, 1 bedroom. We had no money. We were barely scraping by. And the Mac SE at that time cost $6,000, right? And so I figured that's it. There's just something telling me I need to stay up with technology. And so I went and bought it on the 60-month payment plan for $6,000,
And just for fun, do you remember how many megahertz it had? And did it even have a hard
drive?
drive?
I think it was the hard drive was like 40 megabytes, I think was the hard drive. And then I got it, where you could add on some stuff. I think we got it up to 8. And then I think the RAM, it was 2 megabytes. It was not a lot. It was like 2 or 4 megabytes and 40 megabytes of hard drive space. And then it had a dot matrix printer that Apple was making printers at that time.
Right.
And so we bought that, and it was kind of fate because I was in what they call digital pre-press lithography, and just before when I was decided that's it, I'm going to do this myself. There was another part to the story I forgot. Was first of all, the commissions weren't getting paid, which was one thing that was kind of the icing on the cake. Prior to that, I had been going into their office saying, there's these Macintoshes out here. I've got one at home. You should see, this is going to change our business. Typesetting, because we did typesetting. This is going to change our business. Scanning, pre-press, this is going to change our business. And they didn't see it because they were buying at that time systems like Cytex had a system. It was $1 million system, and Hell was a brand, had a Chromacom system, and they just couldn't see it. And we had like these big hard drives that looked like curling rocks, that you would. And so I was looking at it and going, these guys don't see the future. And then the icing was when he didn't want to pay me commission. I thought, geez, this is an awesome time that if I started this business, not to be a competitor in the way they're doing it, but to look at the technology of where it is and see that it's going that way. And let's just, instead of doing drum scanning, which was $500,000, what if we did flatbed scanning? And I know right now, if you hear flatbed, everyone, well, that's normal. No, you have no idea. Like to be that person to convince a major publisher like Disney or Pixar, well, Pixar came later after the fact, but we had major publishers we were doing work, and to tell them that we could get as good a color reproduction on a flatbed as they could get on a drum scanner was really hard. And then, of course, you had the guys that were in the old world trying to protect their drum scanning technology. Right. So that was how I got into Embassy Graphics. Was I found a business I was passionate about. I liked it a lot. I saw that technology was changing it a lot, and then. And I was trying to work with my existing company to see the vision as well. And then the icing was when they decided they didn't want to pay me what they promised to or inferred. I just thought the timing's perfect. And that's when I decided to leave and start Embassy Graphics.
And so you are now responsible for sales because you've started this company.
Yeah, I was responsible. There was 2 of us. So it was funny because the other person that came along was my dad. Huh. And but it wasn't, normally in a relationship like this, it'd be like the father starts a business and the son comes into it. In this particular case, it was I started the business, had the idea, but I had virtually no money. I was lucky to just be paying off my Mac SE, right? So at that time, my dad's no gazillionaire or anything like that. He had actually been, his company had been sold. So he was on the market. He didn't know the business. He was in printing semi-related to what I was doing. And then I said, hey, I've got this thing. Are you interested? And my dad, put up the money and actually mortgaged his house. So here I am, 24 years old. And my dad, believes in me so much that he mortgages his house. And I can't tell you the kind of pressure that puts on someone when you know, like, failure is not an option. Like, my dad can't lose his house.
Were you thinking at any point, hey, Dad, maybe don't do this, never mind?
No. I probably would now as you get older, right? But back then, no, I felt that we had something. I knew it was going to go. I had confidence in myself. I also knew my dad's past was in sales, and once he adapted, it would go well. Yeah, no, I never did. But I will say there was times where there were some really dark moments where it was like, I think my dad might lose his house, for sure.
So how did you dig out of that? How did you grow the business?
You know what? You just keep working hard and you catch a break. There was probably about 3 years into it. And part of the issue was we were growing pretty fast. And when you grow fast, it requires more cash. It's strange. You think, we're growing. And it got to a point where we had to bring on in the third year another investor. We raised some more money. But it was like all I could do is work harder. So make more calls. You have no idea how many, like New York was a market that I spent most of my time in, New York and San Francisco. And literally I was on the road basically every single week. So a couple hundred days a year on the road, just making calls and calling on places. And we got lucky. We landed in New York. There was a magazine at that time. It's still around, but it's called Leaders Magazine. And most people have never heard of it. It's the most fascinating magazine. It only goes to world leaders, and so you'll only have, Saudi princes and presidents and that. So anyway, that was a turning point, getting that magazine. And then we got Aspen Magazine from Colorado. And then we got Random House. We got HarperCollins. We got Disney. Eventually Pixar came on board. Like we built when we started, it was pretty interesting because I couldn't get quality people. We started a company with the C team. The Bad News Bears is probably the best way to put it, because all the A team looked at it. Who's this 24-year-old kid? They're working for big companies. The guys that I worked with at my previous company, they loved me and we got along great. And then when you go, you have your Jerry Maguire moment. Okay, guys, who's coming with me?
No one's come.
Nobody comes, right? And which I totally understand. And so we started with the C team. So I like to say we did 3 times the work we charged for, because we had to do things 3 times over. It was wrong 3 times before it got out the door. And and it was hard. So you're growing. We grew every year for the first 11 years at 30% growth organically. For the first 11 years. We didn't do any acquisitions, anything, and we really exploded. And in the process, though, when we started bringing in the new technology, we were creating the A team. So it wasn't like I could steal somebody from, the old technology. We had to create our own, that's when there was a big turning point, is when we started doing it with new technology. And in many respects, I think it was a blessing not hiring that old A-team group, because they have those preconceived ideas of how things are.
Right.
Whereas if you bring some of the greatest people we had didn't know what side of paper what side of a printing press the paper went in and out. They had no idea, but they were kind of these tech geek sort of guys, and they came in and just did an awesome job, like just blew me away in terms of what we could do.
Now, looking back, what do you wish you had known about sales that you had to learn on the fly?
What do I wish I had known? I think there's, aside from, I could talk about the mechanics of it, but I would say the strategy. If looking back now, what I would say is finding that core market. Like, we did a lot of shotgun approach, like just we're calling on this type of industry, that, we're throwing stuff at the wall and what stick. And eventually, if certain things stuck from a certain industry, that became our niche. Right. So if I was to do it again, I'd probably be much more strategic. That would have saved a lot of time, because there's things that you do. You go after certain accounts you shouldn't go after. You don't define, like, some people will go after big accounts when they really should be dealing with small to medium sized business or vice versa. So I would have been more strategic in that. That would have saved me a lot of time and aggravation, and it would have shortened the learning curve. But again, that's how you learn the hard way.
I think I'd say the same thing. I think that's a common issue, right? It's very hard psychologically. You feel like you're limiting yourself if you focus too narrowly, but
exactly.
It makes everything so much easier if you can do it.
Takes courage. Yeah. It's hard.
Okay, so you start growing this business and you need some capital, but it's going well. What happens after that?
Well, the world turned again. So I consider myself being in technology, like my whole career, even though printing doesn't sound like technology, but the part of the printing process that I got into is where all the technology was, computer to plate, scanning, Macs, assembly, all that stuff. So what happened though is when you hang your hat on technology shifts. Right. So we got in, and just when we were rolling, it's like, man, we finally got it figured out. Then all of a sudden, come around the corner, they called it computer to plate, and then digital printing, right? And now all of a sudden, it's like, and even PDFs came out, which was like groundbreaking, because we used to make these for newspapers. We'd make these black and white, what they called Veloxes, right? And we would make a ton of money on them. They were $10 each. You'd make them, you'd put them in a package, you'd send them out, to newspapers. You could be doing like $10 a piece, like for a print. That's it, right? PDFs come out, all that's gone.
Right.
Like it's zero, right? So now all of a sudden, technology is really throwing us again, and our core business that we were doing so well at, it starts going down. Our scanning business, the prices just keep dropping, right? Because now people are now buying their own Macs, and they're doing their own PDFs, and they're doing their own scanning. So now the whole world turned upside down on us, and we had to scramble. Actually, it was at a point where we cut at least half our staff, and our staff were like family to us. As a matter of fact, the company's still around today. I sold it, but it's still around today, and they have employees that are still there. The company now is 27 years old. They have people there 26 years. The average person's probably been there 20 years. Like okay. It's a really good company, good group of people. So anyway, I had to lay off half these people, and then I had to figure out, how are we going to survive? And the only way we could survive is we'd have to invest more money and go out. So it's like, just when you get a breather, like, oh, we're finally, and you think you could sit on top of the mountain. Now I'm in a situation that my old bosses were kind of in. Technology's changing. So I had to reinvent the company, and I had many a person tell me that they felt it would be best that I bankrupt the company, that it would be easier to start over brand new than it would be to transition. And part of the reason is just even culturally, the staff, right? The staff is used to doing it a certain way. They think, this is the valuable way. And now you're saying, well, what you thought was valuable? Now anybody can do it. It's not valuable. And
same problem that you were fighting at the beginning.
So we ended up muscling through it. And so I ended up doing a transition into digital printing. And we were one of the first digital printing companies with what's called an HP Indigo. And it was cutting edge technology. Basically a digital press that looked like a printed sheet. You could not tell the difference from a traditional printing press. It was, they had photocopy, color copier stuff, but this was, and so we got into that. And here's a funny story about sales and what turned our fortune, because we ended up becoming the largest in the Canadian market. That's where our plants were, the largest digital photo book manufacturer, digital print. We had like Snapfish and Peekaboo and all, Lulu, all these big book, Shutterfly type companies. And so anyway, the way we got into that, someone says, well, how'd you get into that business, right? Like, and what it is you're printing off one-off books.
Right.
And you're talking thousands of books. So every book is different, which is, back then the concept is like, no, if you're going to print books, you're printing, 1,000 or 5,000. You want a better price? Let's do 10,000, right? So all of a sudden, one day it was a Friday, and you might like this from the wine or the beer story, but it was a Friday. I was despairing again. Like we were into digital print, but we really didn't have that, anchor client. We were still in a state of flux. And I got this phone call on a Friday, and like late Friday, and someone says, "Do you do photo books?" And I said, "What's a photo book?" And they said to me, "Well, we have a trade show on Thursday." Right. So only, 4 or 5 working days away. And we built this software where you can upload your pictures. Instead of a photo album, you can make it into a book, and then you print one book and you ship it. And I'm like, yeah, we can do that. Right. And I'm thinking, listen, I've got, I've been in production, manufacturing, printing. If anyone can figure it out, I can figure it out. So, and this was all over the phone. They were out of Sacramento. There were a bunch of techies from San Francisco that created this incredible product that they sold. In the old days, there would be like PC Magazine has some. I think it was called Snappy or something, and they ended up like in 1 year selling like 20 million of these things, and all of them these guys became super rich, and they were all like developer guys. You'd pull in, they've got Ferraris and stuff like that. So anyway, they called me, didn't know them. They said, "Can you do it?" I said, "Yeah," and can you send me the files? So they did. And at that time, I don't even think they could FTP at that time. I was thinking they almost had to send them in a disk, right? But so they sent them. And so at this point, I had bought a facility in Toronto. So I was running that facility. And I was like, okay, the toughest part was not printing it. We could do that, the variable printing. The toughest is binding it. And so we had no binding equipment to speak of. So I figured, I got to find someone to outsource this, right? So I remember I started calling around to all these bindery places, and I'm talking everywhere, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Vancouver, and all wanting to, you're a bindery shop. Would you do these books for me? And they're like, "We don't do one-off books. That's crazy." And so it turns out that I found, believe it or not, one guy that was 90 miles away from me, like who has been a family bookbinder since like 100 years. His great-grandfather or something started the business. And then there was another guy in Minnesota who I found, right? And actually the funny story with the beer or the wine was I got a call. So on Monday, I did all these calls and nothing happened. So I sometimes when it's just like that, I'll sit down and just have beers. And being an Ironman personality, I'm all or nothing. So when having beers is like, have beers, like a lot of beers. So I remember my dad calling me and my dad saying, "Hey, what's going on?" I told him, I got to find this binder. And I said, "I'm just sitting out here on the deck right now having a bunch of beers." And he knew what that meant. And he knew magic's going to happen tomorrow. It always does. And so next day on Tuesday, I get on the phone. I find this binder. So here's the great part. I go, who do I go with? I decide, you know what? I'm gonna print these up and send them to both of these guys. Right now, the trade show's Thursday. Monday, I haven't got I've got them printed, but I don't have a binder. Right. So now I have to fly them to these guys. So they get them on Wednesday. Right. And it has to be this trade show on Thursday. Anyway. I said to him, bind them. I couldn't see them, couldn't do QA. And then I said, each of them send FedEx to the trade show. And it turns out that this is the truth. FedEx plane, one of the planes in Minnesota, had a breakdown. Like, when do you ever hear of a FedEx plane having a breakdown? The guy told me that, and I was like, come on. And sure enough, I check, and it was broke down. So the package from the other bindery that was 90 miles away from me arrived, and they had the trade show, and it was wonderful, and boom, 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 right? Turns out, as a sidebar, I had that other package sent back to me. The books had all fallen apart. So that's how I got into the photo book business. And then from there, we just started making calls on all of these other photo book companies. And, the one we even called on Apple. Unfortunately for Apple, they wanted you to have facilities all around the world, and we couldn't accommodate there. But they were really interested in what we were doing. We're very high quality. And, but yeah, we ended up starting to get all those because we were doing what no one would do. What do you mean one-off books?
So you sort of accidentally backed your way into a niche,
Totally.
which is a killer niche.
Killer niche. Yeah. And then you're saying, so I start this pre-press company that now is in trouble. It did well, struggled to do well, starting to do well, starts going down. Now we have to reinvent the entire company, reorganize it, restructure it. Now we get into the photo book space. Then the photo book space leaps us into the yearbook space. And that's where I looked at the yearbook industry, because yearbooks, they're very traditional. You have to order them like 3 months in advance of the school year. You have to spend all year doing it. It's like you have to pre-order 3,000 copies. And if the school doesn't sell them, then the school's in a deficit. It's just a really ugly business. And so it was funny. One of the oldest yearbook companies in the area, I think it was a family-run business for 50 years, came and the girl one of the daughters who was running it said, "I'm going bankrupt on Friday. Do you want to buy my business?" And this was like on Monday, and I said, well, that's not a lot of time to do like due diligence and all this other stuff, right? And so she said, look, this is the way it is. And it wasn't a very organized business. It had a lot of issues. And I decided, you know what? It was basically, she's saying, here, take it over and it's yours. And so I was like, okay, I took it. And then for the next year, every time we lifted a rock, snakes came out. Right. It was like stuff. But what was great about it was that company was selling dollars for 75 cents. It was losing money. It was just the whole variety of reasons. So what I did was I jumped in and I said, first of all, we're doing price increases right across. And every contract, I told the sales department, you have to break every contract. And of course, sales guys are like, I'm not breaking, because she wasn't a sales guy, they would intimidate her. Right. Because I have a sales background. It's like, you're not going to intimidate me. So the reality is we're in a situation like we are because we're selling too cheap. So I had them go break contracts, and out of, I think they had 400 contracts, only 2 didn't sign. And so, which was just, they were really happy about that. Then what I did was I said, look, we should be building online software. So I put a team together and we developed complete yearbook online software where, cloud-based, people could, do text, just like photo books, everything that, Snapfish and Shutterfly.
What year are we at now, just to give people a reference
talking,
point?
This would be about 2007, 2008.
Okay.
So about, 11 or 12 years ago. And so we just started. It wasn't my full vision yet, but it was like 80% of my vision was there. And we started doing really well. And we guys, Jostens and all the big companies started knocking on our door wanting to buy us. And at that point, I looked at it and I go, I've been in printing 20 years now, and I really don't like it. Not anymore. It's not fun. We were showing up to lose every day. You got the web, you got the internet, you've got web pages. Where's printing going, right? Like and so they came in, and I had really 2 divisions. I had the photo book division, which Jostens and all them don't want, and then I had the yearbook division, which is what they did want. And maybe this is my greatest sale. I was able to split the business. First of all, I sold the business without financials. So, and even we had a business broker that came on to sell the business, and he goes, okay, where's the financials? And of course I showed him, but I said, we're not selling this business with financials. He goes, what do you mean? Like, people want to see financials? I go, no, because I knew when you give financials, they're going to look at it as a multiple of earnings, put formulas. So instead, what I said to them was, look, I want to sell them the sales, right? Because that's what, they'll look at it and they're going to say, if I can get $5 million worth of more sales based on my current infrastructure, what's going to throw them down to my bottom line? That's what they're going to see, right? So anyway, we did that, and the broker, we managed to not only sell it without financials, but we sold it to 2 separate entities, and we had them both close on the same day. It took 6 months to do it all, but we were able to do it. So just to put in perspective, without talking real numbers, we easily got 5 times more than we would have if we had shared financials.
So you sold the yearbook division and the photo book division separately?
2 separate companies. Yeah.
Now, what do you think of the wine at this point?
I think it's awesome, and I'm talking so much. I wish I was drinking more of it.
It's not very fair. Here, I'm going to put a little bit more in your glass. And I don't know if you can tell this, but I feel
This
like
is like delicious.
it's very good, and it tastes even better than when we first opened it. Right? It's not quite so hard. It doesn't pop immediately the way it
It's got
does.
a fruity sort of. That's really nice.
Hints of grape,
Yeah,
as I like to say. I'm not an expert. I just play one on TV.
This is really good. So that I sold the businesses, and then the transition before Scout was so here was a really interesting story. So I had a team around me, and I had this vision for a yearbook. I thought that we had turned the yearbook around, but it was still kind of doing it traditional, but using some desktop tools to build it, like clients do it. But I had this vision that, what if we could do every yearbook one-off, and what if they didn't have to send pages in throughout the year, they didn't have to prepay, they didn't have to pre-order, and what if they could personalize every yearbook with students' pictures and all that, and then what if we could do it for the same price as these companies that were printing 3,000, that we could do it for the same book price? And at the time, part of the reason I sold is we had other investors and partners, and those that even weren't partners been with the company a long time, CFO and stuff. And they were pushing back on me. They were like, "Nah, it can't be done." It was just the negative sort of stuff. And I just remember, like, you know what? I know this can work. And the opportunity came to sell the business. And once I sold it, I put together a business plan on my master vision of what I thought we could do with the yearbook, and just revolutionize the yearbook.
So you basically accidentally fell into photo books, accidentally fell into yearbooks, kind of got rid of that and said, okay, clean slate, how do we want to do this?
Right.
Now let's do it deliberately.
Yeah, and it was a plan that I had that everyone said wouldn't work.
Okay.
Right. So the first thing I did was I went down to Silicon Valley, and because my customers were all there, like in the photo book space, they're all Silicon Valley companies, right? Snapfish, Peekaboo, Shutterfly. That's where it all happened, revolutionized. So I called on one of my customers and told him that I had sold the business, and he was a photo book business. And it was called Peekaboo. And Howard Field and I went for dinner. He was the CEO, co-CEO. We had a conversation. He says, "Bryan, why do this? Let's do it together. Like we've just got someone who's committed to give us X amount of dollars and to get into the yearbook space. Your timing is excellent." So it started with two of us. Actually, Howard gave the yearbook side to just myself and one other person that I worked with, Bill. And he was the GM, I was the president. We had nothing else. There wasn't a customer service person. There wasn't a salesperson. We didn't even have software yet. It was just all like in the mind. And we assembled the team. I shouldn't say we didn't have developers. We now had put developers together. We had a meeting. None of them knew anything about yearbooks or anything. I remember it was a big meeting in Las Vegas. We had rented like one of those big rooms that you see on, like those Las Vegas, The Hangover and stuff,
Right.
So it was like almost a floor, it seemed like, and there was about 12 of us in there, all these developers and whiteboards, and we're, diagramming everything. Really awesome team of developers and UX and UI, and we came out of there that weekend with here's everything that Bryan had in his head. Now this is what we have to do. And in 9 months, we went from zero to building this software. And then in the process, I negotiated with the printers, which they hated me because I knew everything about printing and their costs. And the at the end of the day, the long story short was the vision I created got developed, actually got a patent for one of the items that I developed. And we everything that we wanted, the price point came in, all this stuff came in, and there was a unique way how we marketed through our sales department, which we'll touch on, but it absolutely just rocked the yearbook world, absolutely rocked it.
So you delivered all these things,
Everything.
Right? Personalization, no prepayment, et cetera.
From the idea until we had our first job in the door was less than a year. Like from no code written.
So, it sounds like you've got this product that sells itself. What do you need a sales team for?
Exactly. It sounds like it. So
It always sounds that way, right? That's why
So
we want to go to the details.
You have to look at your customer. Now, first of all, selling yearbooks, you're selling it to schools. Who are the most risk-adverse people on the planet? Teachers.
Right.
If they weren't, they would be entrepreneurs or go into sales. They're pragmatic, right? They look at it, they evaluate the pros, the cons. When you're dealing with the yearbook, the other thing with the yearbook that a lot of people don't realize is it's one of the largest expenditures in a school. So you have a school of 3,000 kids, and let's say a yearbook is $90 each. You do the math. That's a huge amount of dollars. Some of these contracts were $200,000. So could you imagine someone walking in and saying, "Oh, scrap that guy, come to us, you save money," and then that teacher's looking at it going, I'm a volunteer.
Right.
If this thing gets screwed up, I could lose my job or whatever. And then you also have, like anything, people have their fiefdoms, right? And these guys are getting called on by all these big yearbook companies, and the yearbook companies are taking them for lunch. They're, listening, they come in and they listen to all their problems, and they, "Oh man, they're scratching their back, you poor thing," and sincere relationships evolve. So it's like 10, 15 years. So how do you just go in there? And because it's online, do you think that someone's going to, "Oh, it's online. Well, my rep who I have a relationship for the past 10 years that has been delivering things to my house late at night to make deadlines and all the rest of that, you think I'm just going to throw them away?" So we realized that we needed, you had to have flesh to flesh. You had to have somebody there that in a certain period of time, there's no doubt that it'll be at a certain point in time where you will not need a sales rep. And in many cases, we're starting to see that now in yearbook space, that it's less and less important. But when you're making that core transition, you have to have a sales team.
So how did you go about putting that together?
Well, so there was a couple things. The first thing is you look at it and you say, okay, we're going to build our own sales team. We're going to hire people and they're going to go out there and they're going to sell. So there was a couple of issues with that. Is number one is there's a huge cost to it, right? You got to give someone a salary, a base, all that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is there's management of it is a big deal as well, because sales, man, if I hire 10 and 2 do well, I love it. To me, you're going to hire 10 to find 2. And so it was just not practical for us. We didn't have the resources to spend that kind of money. So then I looked at it, and I also wanted a certain type of person. I thought, what if we turn this into a business opportunity where we sold protected sales territories, so that we found people that were entrepreneurial sales types that did not want to do manufacturing, didn't want to do customer service, but they just wanted to sell. And what if we went and defined territories for them, so many schools, and we sold that to them? And that was where the model took off. And we called them dealers, peekaboo dealers, and they bought sales territories. And I knew we were onto something because we had already, before the software was done, we had sold 30 territories. So based on, I had put together, it was kind of like my first job. Why did you get into sales? And I had to write 30 pages. I did the exact same thing for yearbooks. I said, okay, here's our manifesto. This is what makes us different. This is what the opportunity is all about. These are our competitors, and pounded it out on a computer this time, not a typewriter, and basically gave people a piece of paper and said, trust us, in 9 months we're going to have software and you're going to be able to start selling to schools in September. And
now, how did you know who to give this piece of paper to?
That's hard, because the hardest part was, how do you get people interested? And so we did all kinds of things. We thought, maybe real estate agents, they're all out there. They're in the community. No, real estate agents just didn't work. And for a variety of reasons. And we thought, what about stay-at-home moms, or that want to get back into the workforce? And some of that worked. And then, but what really what did it for us is, fortunately, Peekaboo had a large client list, right? Selling photo books, traditional photo books, and a lot of raving fans. So we sent out emails to these hundreds of thousands of people, and many of them applied themselves. and then others started referring friends. And then we also found people in the school industry that were selling books, like selling textbooks today or selling fundraisers like chocolates and things. That's a hard business right now, right, in the school. So they were looking, I'm not selling textbooks, but I have all these relationships. Why don't I buy a peekaboo, my own business? So that's how we ended up. And I think within the first 9 months, we had sold, I think it was 113 territories.
Now, just because I don't know anything about this, how many territories were there eventually?
I left before we covered the whole country, but the whole country would have been, trying to look, probably would have been like 1,000 territories.
Okay.
Yeah. So we kind of really knocked it out of the park. We also did some really innovative marketing and sales stuff.
So what determined whether someone was going to be successful in this role? You mentioned that real estate people, not such a good fit. Stay-at-home moms, not such a good fit. Some people in some of their existing customers turned out to be good fits. What were the traits that made someone succeed versus fail, or was it impossible to tell?
That's a question that I'm sure you probably ask everyone, and I'm going to give you my answer before I answer that. I'm going to give you my answer, and I'm going to give you my friend's answer.
Okay.
Now, I've run successful sales teams, and I would say I have some good credibility in terms of what I'm going to say. Now, my friend has way more experience. His sales department is 2,500 reps, okay? And they are direct selling reps, like hardcore sales guys. And him and I were sitting there having a discussion about just what you said, what makes a good rep? Where do you find them? And he said to me, his name's Simon, he said, Bryan, out of 20 years of hiring salespeople, I can tell you unequivocally, I have no idea who's going to succeed. He says, and I'm the same way. You'll get those people that come in that look great, talk great, just absolutely phenomenal, and you think they're going to knock it out of the park. And then you get some of those people that come in that are a little awkward, maybe disheveled, and stumbling, and they end up being hit salespeople. So the answer is why we did the protected sales territories was to flush out who these good reps are. Because if you're a good rep and you believe in yourself, and to me, it's having that passion. Do you have the passion? Do you believe in yourself enough to not only get paid straight commission, but to put money down so that you could have the privilege to get paid straight commission. Right. And the minute we did that, it just brought a whole different type of person. And none of them were, it's funny, many of them were not even salespeople like in a traditional career sense. Many of them had done many other things, raised horses, was a stay-at-home mom her whole life. And they put the money down, and there was just, once they did that and they had that sense of ownership that I own this now, this is my business. There's that sense of being able to sit down with your friends. What are you doing? I own a business. And there's just there's an inner drive or an inner fire when people feel that they own it. So to me, that's how we separated, was we said, okay, if you believe in it enough, are you prepared to pay?
Right.
And I can say we had a pretty high degree of success.
So it's very strong self-selection for people who are going to go work hard and do their thing.
It really is. And that's even why what I liked about it, you still have to do training. Like my original thought was when I started this, this is going to be great. I'm not even going to have to train them. You just, and they're going to be on their own business. And you're thinking how I would do it. Like for me, I'd be pretty autonomous if I did it. So I was a little off on that. You have to provide the training, and we were able to backfill on that. But self-selection and the self-driving. The one thing that a lot of people, it sounds good, as a business owner, someone, oh man, I want to do that. I'm going to get someone to pay to be a sales rep, and I'm going to let them own a territory. Here's the rub. One of the greatest benefits of it is they're going to tell you what's not working.
Okay.
And if you don't have a thick skin, and if you're not truly partnering with them, it's a disaster, because you could, it could become an us and them situation. We are the territory owners / salespeople. You are the company, and there could be conflict, right? So it's a great model, but and for me, I like it. I really do, because I like hearing what's not going right. And I also like when people are passionate about it. And if they have a vested interest, they're making sure you hear about it. It makes the company a much stronger, better company, in my opinion. So it's got some definite pluses, but you also have a culture that supports that.
So what makes a good business for this type of model? Because I imagine not every business is structurally going to be a good fit.
I'm now on to a second business with this model. So the yearbook business was one. Now I've launched Scout Deals, and Scout is basically an advertising platform. So we've followed the same model, but the rules are different. So I believe now it won't fit all businesses, and I'm not going to profess that because I don't know all businesses, but most of the businesses that I've seen, if you can sit and work through rules, like if you have rules for your sales team and your sales reps, and it depends on the type of business, right? If the value is in the salesperson, definitely that it's got to be a business where salespeople are valuable, right? And if it is, then it's just a matter of working through the rules. So, for example, in our business, we have two types of accounts. So even in a geography, we have small to medium businesses, but we also have enterprise businesses. So a small to medium business could be, just a local pizza shop, whereas a enterprise business could be a Domino's or a Papa John's or whatever. So then, we're selling territories, and we're saying you're buying all the small businesses in our case, but you're not buying the enterprise. Right? Because if enterprise is so much dependent on an organization, it's not, the sales rep might get you in, but it's the organization that has to manage this. So we just worked out a structure where you can still go after enterprise, but it's a different comp plan. Whereas all the small business, you basically own that. And it takes time. Like it took us, quite a bit of time because you're always like, what if this, what if that, and you're building this model from scratch. But yeah, I think most businesses I think most businesses can accommodate some sort of model like that if it makes sense for them culturally, and more in a startup mode. If you're bootstrapping, you're needing good talent, you need that A team, but you don't have the money to even pay a D team.
Right. So basically, you give them an all commission plan that they have to buy into, but they're going to get a much higher effective commission rate than if you had hired a traditional sales force.
They definitely have tremendous upside. So they get a much higher sales. Yes, it would be over the long term much cheaper hiring an established sales team. And in fact, we give such a good commission amount that they can hire their own salespeople, because that's part of the deal, is that if you can hire your salespeople, and then they own the territory. So they can sell it if they want. So they're building equity. If they build their business up in 2 or 3 years and they decide, hey, I want to sell this, they can sell it. I can't, I could, unless there was something that was completely inappropriate, they could sell it to whoever they wanted to.
So it's basically an asset. So sure, they have to put money down at the beginning, but hopefully they make income off that asset, and then that asset also increases in value.
Right. And we also, we have, our price fluctuated when we started. So in the beginning, here we are as this, and I'm talking about Scout Deals now, we're this new company, we're fully transparent. And we said, look, we have this model. We don't yet have customers. We have big enterprise clients that we had put on the app already, but we hadn't done the small to medium size. We have no customers. And we don't know what the sales cycle, we think it's going to be this.
Right.
We think this, we think that. And, but then we said to them, look, we think that we're normally going to charge X amount of dollars, but down the road when we're proven. But right now, we don't have that, so we're prepared to charge you less, and we're prepared to give you terms, and with the idea that the terms, if they start hitting the numbers, it starts paying for itself anyway. And now we're starting to see some uptake that we're not doing the payment plans now. So the folks that were in early, they should get, and that's the way you got to look at it, as a partnering with your sales team. Right. It's like, if you're in early, you're prepared to take the bigger risk. And we'll actually, even the ones that are in early, will probably end up getting a higher commission rate than the people down the road as well.
Because they're taking a bigger risk. They're the early investors in a sense.
They are our partners. Exactly. That's a great way to put it. They're our early investors.
And so I know it's hard to know at the beginning who's going to be successful and who isn't. Are there any behavioral things or best practices or whatever that come out as these people are giving you feedback that say, here are the people who succeed and here are the folks who don't?
Yeah, it's very interesting because they all come from varied backgrounds. Most have like experience in sales. It's varied. Some are, were stay at home, and some were, in a large organization, right sized, out or whatever. And even though that people have sales experience, there's still a lot to learn. So what I find, number one is passion. Passion, it doesn't matter what it is. The one thing, if someone says, what do you look for in someone? Passion and drive. That's it. Give me someone with passion and drive, and the rest they can learn. If you ever see any of our ads for salespeople, you'll laugh because they don't go, things like good communicator, strong written skills, none of that. It basically, I've had so many people apply, and I'll put them in Craigslist. My best people have come through Craigslist, and I'm talking senior people. And I'll write something up that says, we're doing this, looking for someone who has the, boom, boom, like 3 lines. That's it. And those have been so powerful for us. And when I write them, because I write a lot of this stuff, what I've learned is, I write it from the heart. So when I'm ready to hire someone, I'm not necessarily pulling it off of a template or looking what's there or looking on a web what someone else did and cut and paste. I've done that in the past. It doesn't work. What do I want? It's like a Jerry Maguire moment. Write it. I did a manifesto of what I wanted for a sales rep on the opportunity, and it was like 3 pages long, right? And it was my most successful ad. It was like, it started with, this is a true story.
Okay. And is this available online somewhere, or is this private?
Yeah, it's yes. It's, if you go to our website, it talks about the sales opportunity and the territory ownership. And it was my son who, I was frustrated, and he said to me, Dad, why don't you just, I forget how he worded it, but just, tell your story, and he wants to be a filmmaker. And so in 1 hour, that's all it took, 1 hour. And I like writing. I ran a blog for a long time. I did this thing, and I had people communicating with me that they were crying when they read it. It spoke to their heart. You
stripped out all the BS and you told a real story.
I just told a real story part of the reason why I started Scout, and part of it, and it was all true, not just part. Before I started Scout, I was actually thought, I don't know if I want to start another business anymore. And, I'm good at sales. Maybe I can just sell. If I could find an opportunity to just sell, work from home, this would be great. And I started looking around and you'd see these jobs like they're, unlimited earning potential, kind of scammy sort of things. And there was no like real jobs that I was looking for. And that's when I thought, look, I have this, if I go ahead with Scout, which is, another passion. And if I created this sales opportunity that I would go for, it would be perfect, because I would look at it and go, yeah, this guy's taken all the risk with technology. He's got all the infrastructure. He's got all the accounting. All I got to do is sell, and develop my territory. Hey, I'll do that. That's what my ideal job would have been at this stage. And so I wrote it. That's how I just wrote, this is a true story. I started my business. I went through my career. It was a little bit about me. This is what we're doing at Scout. This is what makes us different. And I had I have what I call the 48-hour rule, and everybody in the company knows this. If it doesn't work in 48 hours, it's not working in 48 days. So if for example, I run an ad, and if I don't get a response on that ad right away, and actually it's 24, but I move it to 48 just to be safe. But when I put that ad in Craigslist, and I actually had put it, Indeed turned it down. They wouldn't post it. Okay. And because they looked at it, it was just like, well, this isn't like a normal ad that someone would run. It's like too, I guess, like I'm trying to hustle or something, but they turned it down, but Craigslist didn't, and ZipRecruiter didn't, and it flooded. Like I think we got, I'm going to say the first day, a couple hundred resumes.
Okay.
We've gotten over 3,000 from that one, and so it helps separate and bring a passionate type of person.
So how do you know when you're the person out there looking for opportunities, hey, this is possibly legit versus this is scammy? I mean, some of them are obviously scammy, I'm guessing, but how do you tell in the gray area?
Well, for me, right off the bat, you see the ones where they're selling energy or, like consolidate your heating bills and stuff like that. There's, or you do a Google search of the name and it comes up Better Business Bureau, all kinds of stuff. Which I forgot to tell you, before I even got in, after I did lawn care, I sold alarm systems door to door. That was one of the funnest experiences I ever had. I was a top salesman in the first month, over 40 guys. And it was right out of Glengarry Glen Ross. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. Anyway.
So how did you, not to go too far on a tangent, but how did you become the top sales guy in the first month? That must have pissed a bunch of people off.
It did. There was this one guy, an older guy, Richard, a Brit. He was, oh man, I don't know what was wrong with that guy, but he was so upset. He was the top guy, and I came in, I listened. The one thing, is especially when you're young, you're a sponge, right? So they had kind of like their Xerox sort of 7-day training or whatever. So I was there, and they do role playing, and I was good at that. And then to me, sales has always been, don't focus on technique. Focus on the compass, due north. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to help you, and I also look at it empathetically, like, would I make that same decision? I'm really sincerely trying to help them. And if that person, if I would have made the decision differently, why are they not seeing what I'm seeing? And there's times where they'll have an argument and I'll go, you're absolutely right. Like I wouldn't buy it under those circumstances either, right? So I think that it's just part of the core is you want to help people. I've always wanted to do that. And I have a natural ability for communicating. I think people see that I'm sincere, trustworthy, and I'm tenacious too. I'm passionate. Like I at the end of the day, I'm not aggressive, overly aggressive. I'm a cajoler is probably the best way to put it. I like to cajole, but if at the end of the day it makes sense, but they don't see it, then either I haven't done my job, or they're just no matter there may be another objection that they didn't want to.
And so, I'm not saying you're a bad salesperson. I'm sure you're a great salesperson. It just seems like statistically, out of 40 people there, if you said, I was in the top 10 after the first month.
No, I was number one.
You'd be like, are these people terrible? Like all the things you're saying, that sounds like the stuff that they should be doing. Were they not doing that?
No, actually, the cute story about that is they used to have, so you've seen like the movie Tin Man, right? Where they have all the, so that's a classic sales movie where they have all the women, I think Danny DeVito's in it, and I forget who else, but they have all the ladies doing the calls back then, booking appointments, right? So this is the way they used to do it with this alarm company, and they'd book and say, okay, I bring them a steak knife set, right? So it was like right out of selling vacuum cleaners or that sort of encyclopedias. So I knew things were going good because the girls that did the calls, most of them were young girls. They got bonuses if whoever they got the appointment for sold. So in the beginning, I'm getting these leads. I'm showing up, and the people can't speak English,
right?
But they know they were getting a free steak knife set. So I was like, man, I got these. But then I started closing some. So what happened was, now all of a sudden they start seeing that I'm closing stuff, and I start getting even better leads, but because they don't want to waste them. So I think part of it is the girls were giving me some good stuff, but I also, it was 4 appointments a day. We had an 11 o'clock, a 2 o'clock, a 7 o'clock, and a 9 o'clock. And then we were back at work every day at 7 a.m. It was right out of Glengarry Glen Ross. And the guy who ran it, we called him the Fat Man. He was a used car dealer sort of guy, but he had been really successful, jewelry all over, huge guy, always sweating. And anyway, he would have his contest like, okay, first sale today, it's $20. And I actually, after the first month, I got a gold ring that they had. They had and I was only there. So it was my first month of sales. First 2 weeks I was training, but then the first month in sales official, I went right to the top.
So you're not a big guy of, read these 30 sales books. Here's my 20-step call template. You just listen to people and help them?
No. Okay. So yes and no. So I don't want to come across like I am I've studied sales. There's not a sales book that I don't think I haven't read. When I was doing sales, I would pre-write my questions. We would, at that point we were selling a bigger product, so we'd have what we called needs assessments, and I'd have the questions pre-written out so that I could listen to the answers and I'd take notes. Then I would come back with a letter of understanding. This is what we talked about, trial closes in there. I took many a sales course. Even to this day, just the other day, I now it's audiobooks, but sales scripts at work.
Mm-hmm.
I still do that even with you have to, it's like anything. It's like a sport. You have to sharpen the saw. There's times that I'll read through this and I'll go, I forgot all about that. I did that years ago and now I'm not doing it.
Okay, glad to hear it. Because you made it sound like, I just walk in there and the next thing you know, I'm the top sales rep.
No, and I've trained so many salespeople. When you train, that's when you learn.
Right.
That's so I'm glad you brought that up because I have honed this craft and continue to.
If you had to pick one sales book, what would it be?
It's not an off-the-shelf book. It's a course I took called The Science of Selling, and it's by a guy named Bob Petrossi. And he told me that I was like one of his best ever students he's ever had. Like I have this book at home, the workbook it was a session a week long in Vegas. It's tattered every edge, every page. Like I've just went through that. That would be the book that I would, and it's not in the shelves or anything. It's just a course.
Okay. So a little bit off topic, but I think it relates. I'm starting to see some of the personality traits that go into doing an Ironman here. How did you get into doing Ironmans?
So just to preface, I was 17 years old, drunk, hungover, with chili and chips on a couch in my parents' basement with chili and chips coagulating from the night before that I picked up at 2 in the. So imagine this: I'm up at like noon. I'm sleeping on this couch. It was a wrecked night last night, having beers and stopping for chili and chips, and I'm lying on this couch, and all of a sudden the TV comes on, and it's the Ironman. And this was 10 years ago, or like 10 years into the Ironman. It was really new, right? And my girlfriend at the time comes over, and I'm lying on the couch like I'm smoking cigarettes at this point too, right? So I'm lying on the couch. Like I said, I got in trouble a lot in school, and I'm watching this, and I say to Alice, I said, I could do that. And she looks at me. She told me this years later. She goes, I thought he is out of his mind. Like, are you crazy? You can't do. Look, you're on the couch.
You're hungover. You're smoking.
Chili and chips behind your head and the cigarette in your hand. So anyway, that was 17. And I was 50 pounds overweight at the time as well. I forgot to add that. And so 2 years later, I did my first Ironman. And it was just like one day, I said to her, I can do that. And then I went out for my first run, and I went 2 miles, and I literally thought I was going to die. Like, I mean, I came back and had to drink a pitcher of water. There was, gallons of water. And anyway, I did my first half Ironman. And back then, just to put it in perspective, it's not like today. And I don't want to, Ironmans are hard. Back then, it was like Everest is hard today. Back then, Everest was really hard, right? Because you didn't know nutrition. Like Ironman, you didn't know nutrition. You didn't know if you were coming back or not. Like back then, we didn't race the Ironman. We went to finish the Ironman. Most people go to finish, but the higher level are racing it now, right? It's like these guys that are racing Everest now. So back then, it was really scary. And so I was, I think, 20. And at that point, by the time I did it, 19, 20, somewhere in there. And I did my first Ironman. And I think part of the reason I did it as well is I needed to prove to people that I wasn't an idiot. And that, because when you go through school and you're a troublemaker and things like that, and you're like, I always say, people say to me, like, what's the hardest, what's the hardest grade to get? Is it a 80? Is it a 90%? What's the hardest grade? And I always tell people it's 50. Because you never can get 50. You have to get 90 one time, or, you're going to have a test that's 30. Now you got to make up with a 70, right? So like to get bare, and I was a 50 student, 50R all the time. 50 is really hard. Although one year I did apply myself and I got the highest grades in psychology and history in the school. I got a nice trophy for it. I beat out this one girl that never forgot. But anyway, so I just needed to prove to people doing the Ironman. It was like I came across that finish line. I'll remember it to this day. I wish I could relive it. I've done 12 of them now, and I've done them at a high level. There I was going to finish. In the Masters older, I made it qualified for Kona. I went to Hawaii World Championships. I've represented the country. I had a 16-year layoff of not doing Ironman, got 50 pounds again. And then 10 years ago, decided that either I need to enjoy my fatness and be comfortable with it or get in shape. And I got in shape and then got into world-class shape, which I never knew I had that ability. But
so a lot of people will lie there on their couch and see something on TV or the internet these days or whatever. And especially if they're in a drunken stupor, they'll say, I can do that. But most of them don't actually plan to do it and decide to do it and put in the requisite training to do it, especially with something like an Ironman. Like, what was it about that was like, hey, is this really all about I'm going to prove to people that I can just do this?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, like I say, I came across that finish line. I was in tears that I wish that I could get that. I try to tear myself up every time I go through to try to relive that, and it only happens once. But yeah, it was about proving that I was, I wasn't that, that I had something to offer, that I wasn't stupid, that I had internal drive. It was just, there was something that I needed to prove to others that I could do it. And it's also, and it's also like the one thing about an Ironman is the Ironman, when you do it, the race is the victory lap. That's how I describe it. The true Ironman is all the training.
Right.
Like on my biggest year, I had 26 weeks. I did every weekend for 26 weeks. I did over 112 to 149 mile bike rides. And then the next day would be 2.5 to 3 hour runs on Sunday. So I was averaging 17 to 20 hours a week of training while I was running a business. And I was and I put in business hours. I wasn't one of those,
right.
So I'd be swimming at 6 a.m. and then I'd start my rides at 7. But it's just I guess, like I said in the beginning, there's something in my DNA, whether it's selling chocolate bars or, whatever, but you're constantly trying to strive. Like even when I sold the business back in 2010, I had a period of time where they have you on these agreements are paying you, but you're really not doing anything. And it's the first time I ever experienced what retirement was. Like I didn't know if it was a Tuesday or a Saturday, right? And one thing I realized is I got to work. Like there's something about being in the game and like getting yourself in trouble and trying to figure out how am I going to get out of this. And, I'm working like a young man and I love young people too. Right now, I tell people I'm a huge fan of millennials. I love millennials, and people look at me sideways, right? I'm 52 years old this month or in a couple of weeks, and they're like, "What? You like millennials?" And I go, "I love millennials." And they go like, "Well, why do you love millennials?" I said, "Well, first of all, you got to understand." When you look at the background, first of all, I have millennial kids, and anything wrong with millennials is not their fault.
Right.
It's my fault and the parents' fault, right? And but I look at them, and what millennials, if you take a look at their life, and you've heard, everybody gets a trophy for soccer and participation and all this, and the one thing that they haven't gotten is the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And so the one thing that I like about millennials, and I think what they like about me, is that I'm just totally brutally honest with them. I'm not afraid to, tell them, hey, you're way off base. I'm not, I'm not one of those guys that in the past I was, but I've evolved from that. I'm not one of those guys that come into a meeting and say, hey, how was everyone's weekend? And you have the 5 minutes of small chat and all that. No, let's just get down to it, right? And if it's a good idea, great. If it's a bad idea, it sucks, and in a way that, that you just real, that you would talk to your friends, right? And so a lot of the young people that work for me, and they love it. And I've had people that worked for me at the yearbook company. They're just like, you were the greatest guy to work for. I was so hard on them, like not in an a-hole way, but just hard. Like, no, you can do better than that. Like that's,
there's no participation trophies.
Well, I had one guy tell me, and he wasn't a millennial. I have these daily sales calls with the sales team, and I go through and I'll actually go through numbers and say, okay, you did this, you did this, you did this. And this guy's been in sales his whole life and he's new to the team. And he goes, and he ended up not making it, but he goes, it's kind of crazy. Everyone's kind of, hey, their numbers are up there, right? And I'm sitting there going, man, to myself, like every business, whether it's baseball, whatever, let's see the numbers. And then I just told him, I said, look, man, this is not there's no participation trophies here. This isn't a millennial sales force.
Right.
I love working with millennials. They're just, and they've never, and what I also like about them is they're looking for the truth. Like they know, when it comes to a movie, they know what the world shows them on movies, and they want to be part of that movie. Like I even have some of them go, man, you were in the day with regular phones and people talked, and like they're just so intrigued by some of that stuff. And I look at it that I'm blessed because the era that I came from, I was pre-pager. And then when the pager came, it would beep and you'd have to have a bag of quarters and go to a payphone and call the office to get, and I wasn't Madman area, but I was in printing where the ad agency guys did come to the printer and we'd go to the printer and there was a full bar at the printer, right? And there was a lot going on with staff and stuff like that at the printer.
Right.
And then being able to come to today, which is, we've got emails and we've got, everything's so fast and just the whole world changed. And I will say, I like today's world, so much. I love the 70s music. That's all I listen to. And I just love the fact that I was part of that whole thing and was able to see it. And my son, it's funny, I was talking to a guy last night, and he was telling me that we were talking about how great the 70s music is, and he go, yeah, my kids, they really know the 70s music, like it's amazing, and they're like in their 20s and now. And I said, well, do you know why they know the 70s music? And he goes, why? I said, well, because they're used to playing Grand Theft Auto and all that. Who do you think the programmers are? They're us, our age. We're putting our music in there. He goes, wow, you're right, because they know the words to these songs. They know all that stuff.
So top 70s music pick for people who may not have good 70s repertoire.
Oh, American Pie. You got to, that to me is one of my favorites.
I thought that was late 60s. Is that 70s?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's 70s. Yeah. It's, there's so many. You got to love, there's one, and they have the commercials with it now, and I was listening to it yesterday. What's Neil Diamond? Oh, man. Oh, it's going to kill me. There's a commercial now going on it with some girl's name. I forget. Anyway, but I love the fact that we went through this. Now, the one thing, bringing it into a sales conversation, is the principles of sales have not changed. Over this whole period of time, and even one of the first books the first book that changed my life, I remember lying on my waterbed at 19 years old reading Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Changed my life.
Okay.
When I read that book, I was like, wow, this is the life I want to live. And I remember that to this day. That was the first book.
So what are the principles of sales?
Well, that's like saying, like, how do you do brain surgery?
Right. Okay.
Right. Because there's just so much, right? At the end of the day, if you were to say, boil it down, like you can only teach some, just try to help people. Help people make a decision in their best interest. If you do that, I've never in my entire life thought of a commission check. As a matter of fact, for years, I didn't even know, if you would have said to me, how much money do you make within a variable of 40 grand? I couldn't tell you. This was before bank deposit. Mm-hmm. Our accounting person would put the check in my bag. I'd take it home. My wife would know to look, it's Thursday to look at it. I had no idea they had this system going on because I just got so into what I was doing that I'm there to help people. And I know if I help people, that everything else is going to take care of itself. So that would be my number one advice to someone in sales. Sincerely try to help someone.
It's funny you mentioned that because when I was growing up, I thought of salespeople as sort of had this used car salesperson thing. And I realized later when I saw salespeople that I really respected, that the difference was the people I respected were trying to help other people make a decision that was in their best interest.
Right.
The sleazy people were trying to make people make a decision that was in the salesperson's best interest.
Right. That's exactly. And my wife, she laughed. She goes, "Well, every salesman also wants to be sold. Make no mistake. If you're a good salesman, you want to be sold. It's masterful to be sold. Like there's some guys that have sold me that I'm like, damn, I'm tingly. And then, like, I should have paid them to give me that experience." Right. And that's what my wife says. She goes, living with a salesperson, when you see bad sales, it's just like, oh man, you're not even in the game, But I always say too that, the one thing I've said about sales to many people is I'll ask them, what's the highest paid profession in the world? And, some will say, well, doctor, a lawyer, whatever. I go, no. A CEO, no, a sales rep. Even at some of these huge insurance companies, a sales guy will make more than the CEO in many cases, or in some cases, in many companies. And that's because sales, the reason they make that much money is because it's hard to be good at it. Like I get offended when they call me a rainmaker, and you know what that means, right? That he can make rain, he can bring in sales. And so a guy says, "You're a rainmaker, man. You're a rainmaker." I go, "That offends me." "What do you mean?" I go, "I'm a tsunami maker."
Well, Bryan, thank you so much. Cheers.
It was
Thanks
fun.
for being good sport with the wine.
Yeah. Oh man, I wish there's more. This is great.
Well, here we've got another glass. You can take this with you.
Oh, this is fun.